Welcome to Coastal Front. Join us each week as we sit down with the movers and shakers of Vancouver to discuss stories of business, politics, accomplishment, and failure. Our aim is to keep you dialed into what matters most in our city. Now, here's your host, Andrew Johns.
Well, here we are with Geoff Wright. You are the Green candidate for Vancouver Quadra in the very near Vancouver, not Vancouver, the federal election, election 43, number 43.
Yes.
So thanks for coming on the show today, Geoff.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love coming out and talking to people and explaining why I've decided to become a candidate for the Green Party. And I also need a little name recognition, so coming on the radio helps. In fact,
let's talk about your name for a second. You had told me about G with the Geoff for Wright.
Yeah, well, it's Geoff Wright, and what's really cute about it is that Geoff starts with a G, so it's easy for people to remember because Green and Geoff are both starting with G.
There you go.
But Vancouver Quadra is a very polite, and in Vancouver in general, they're all very polite, and they sort of puzzle a bit over the name Geoff. So they sort of hear the first name and they say, Geoff, and then they say, Wright? At which point I say, yes, now you know both of my names.
Well, that's good. Well, hopefully that'll help you on the ballot box as well.
I'm hoping so. As I say, I don't have name recognition. Some of the other candidates have been involved in politics for some time. Yeah. And when you're an incumbent, you get to send out all sorts of literature to your constituents on the taxpayer's dollar.
Yes.
And I don't know, I think you live in Vancouver Quadra as well.
I do, yeah. I'm one of your voters. Yeah. I get her material.
Right. And you get material all the time. And it would just make me a little upset to see it being obviously and clearly related to an election. We weren't able to send anything out at that time. And meanwhile, you keep on getting all this mail that the taxpayer is paying for.
Yeah, it's just one of many reasons why the incumbent has such a natural advantage, for better, for worse, probably for worse. So maybe start off by, you mentioned you're not a lifelong politician. This is sounds like your first stint into politics.
Yeah. It's
talk about your background, please, Geoff.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Yeah. I have I have the advantage of having a very diverse background.
Okay.
I've done a lot of things in my life, and it started briefly. I'm both an engineer and I have a PhD in science. But I should explain some of the work I've done because I think it's significant. So when I was in engineering, and all my work was done at the University of Toronto, I also rode, and I was really fortunate, and that's in part why I'm used to working hard, because I was taking engineering, but I was actually training and became a member of the Canadian national rowing team. So I was able to compete in the Pan American Games. I won the Canada Games in a single. I was in the World Championships. And so with that background, I actually worked in the computer industry for 2 years, and then I came back to school to do a Master's in Human Factors Engineering. Yeah. And because of my interest in physiology and exercise, I actually took a variety of courses, and I wanted to know more about the physiology of rowing. And that got me taking a course with phys ed students. So I'm really sort of knowledgeable about the benefits of exercise, and did some nice studies later on based on that, using that knowledge. But the person that was in charge of that program, he was a medical doctor and also a PhD. He was sort of surprised that an engineer could come in that class and do really well. Yeah. And at the end of the course, he asked me if I wanted to do a PhD, and I hadn't really thought about it, but that seemed like a good opportunity, and I said yes. And he had research money to look at the effects of carbon monoxide on human performance. And I did that. I was actually setting air quality guidelines, particularly industrial standard levels, but also for public. Okay. So I would be out measuring carbon monoxide levels whenever you have incomplete combustion.
In what areas of the country?
No, this was again in Toronto. Okay. But it was all looking at, there's two major exposures. One is when an engine exhausts, it contains carbon monoxide. Yeah. So I was looking at urban exposure to carbon monoxide. But cigarette smoking at that point in time was a huge measure of exposure.
Yeah.
So that led to me being involved with the Lung Association, the Metropolitan Toronto and York Region Lung Association. I actually became president of that association. And because I was working and looking at effects of performance, when I finished my PhD, I actually got a job with the Department of National Defense as a research scientist. And that was absolutely amazing opportunity because I was working at protecting the health and safety of the military personnel at altitude. So I was looking at the effects of low pressure exposure, high altitude. And the other group I was looking at was divers, and I was looking at deep sea diving and nitrogen narcosis and how when you're exposed to high pressures at depth, you get too much, that's why they call it nitrogen narcosis. You're getting too much nitrogen coming in, and it's like having too much to drink.
Yeah, sure.
So, we would go down to, which divers should never do, but we would simulate in a diving chamber and go to 300 feet, for example, on air. And it was like having a party down there. And I was looking at performance. The other really nice thing for me was on the high altitude side, I actually got to go through the sound barrier. Because we were looking at protecting pilots at high altitudes.
Really?
In the event that they lost cabin pressure, you have to protect the pilot.
Yeah.
And we were looking at ways to do that. And part of that was getting in one of the military planes and getting through the sound barrier. And that was quite an amazing experience. And I still remember that one.
Wow, what a history, Geoff. This is great. This is
that's
not
only
even,
starting.
Not even bother talking about politics, man.
No, we're having more fun. You're right. That's why I'm here. But I think you'll get an idea.
Yeah.
Because after that, I actually went to the Ministry of Labour in Ontario.
Okay.
And so my career up to now, and this is answering your question, but in a long route, I actually worked in occupational health and safety.
Okay.
Because my PhD is in ergonomics, which is the science of people at work.
Yeah.
So I created the ergonomics unit in the Ministry of Labour. I've had my own ergonomics consulting firm, so I know what it's like to run a small business. I did that in Toronto for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then when my wife was offered a job out in Vancouver with the BC Centre for Disease Control, she's a public health physician.
Yeah.
When she was offered a job out here, we came out and looked at the price of homes and said, I'm going to have to do something other than consulting because my contacts were all in Toronto. And when you're starting up your own business, there's a lot of upfront time and effort you have to put in. And so I was very fortunate that I actually was hired as the ergonomist here for the city of Vancouver.
Yeah.
And enjoyed that immensely and contributed to the ergonomics. And just to relate that just a bit, I was chair president of the Association of Canadian Ergonomists twice. So it was a national association. So I've got federal experience there. But I also sit with on the technical committee for the Canadian Standards Association.
Okay.
For their standards CSA Z412.
Yeah.
And
these are the little sticklers you see on the helmets, right?
Well, it's things like that. They've got a really tremendous program in various areas. The area I'm in is obviously occupational health and safety.
Yeah.
And so I've sat on their office ergonomics committee 3 times now. In 2000, George Heyman, who's the Minister of Environment right now, he was the chair of that committee, and he, of course, was doing other important things. So he wasn't with us for the 2017, but we've released the 27 standard, and we made changes that are really significant because in 2000 it was called guideline. And I was saying, why is the CSA having a guideline? We need a standard.
Right.
So this time around, it's a standard. It recognizes that you have to accommodate 100% of the people in the workforce. And so you can start seeing that part of this is why I've all of a sudden realized that I have to get involved in politics.
Yeah.
Because the engineer in me says we got to be fiscally responsible. The scientist in me says, I believe firmly that we are in a climate crisis and we have to do something about it.
Yeah.
And I realized that we need to be doing more and we deserve better.
Yeah.
And so when I looked at various aspects, I realized, first of all, I heard Elizabeth May, who is absolutely amazing on her knowledge, and she's been steadfastly pointing out, as other groups have, and Indigenous nations are way up there and way ahead of us on the importance of the climate. But Elizabeth May was talking about what happens when diluted bitumen spills in the water, and the fact that you can't clean it up.
Yeah.
You can if you have calm water.
Yeah.
But, so that was sort of an eye-opener for me. And then, the Liberal government decided to buy a pipeline. And in Vancouver,
you just dove into my first question, Geoff, so keep going.
Okay.
My first question was actually to talk, one of the things we wanted to make sure is we ask all the candidates similar questions.
Okay.
So let's keep going.
All right.
Pipeline, what are your views on the Liberal Party claiming a climate emergency in the summer of last year? It was July 17th or something like that.
I think it might have been June 17th.
June 17th, and then June 18th, they spend $4 billion buying the Kinder Morgan pipeline.
Yeah. I've been upset, and I was motivated to get involved in politics, and that was a huge motivator.
Okay.
As I say, because I'd heard Elizabeth May talking about what happens when diluted bitumen gets in water, if any hydrocarbon, and this is why they say we can clean it up in calm water, it can float. And so the emphasis that the Liberals are saying, well, we're going to have a fast response to a spill. And so if you read the literature that's produced by the group that's responsible for that fast response, they will say that they can clean it up provided the water is calm. Well, as I've mentioned, I've spent all my life in health and safety, and I know that when accidents happen, it's not that simple and straightforward.
Yeah.
So I was absolutely horrified to hear that we can't clean it up, and then to learn that you can only clean it up in calm water.
Yeah.
What happens with diluted bitumen? And if any of your viewers are able to, not while they're driving, but look up Kalamazoo Enbridge spill, and it was a spill of diluted bitumen. It's
into a lake?
Into a tributary into the Kalamazoo River.
Okay.
And when you read that, it's classic what we try and prevent when we look at accidents, because I think it took them a long time to even realize they'd had a spill, because the operators in the control station, and this is where my human factors background comes in, you see the same thing in 3 Mile Island when there was the release of radioactivity. People, when they get information presented, sometimes it doesn't come in a way to let them know what's really going on. And it took them a long time to realize they had a spill and how big that spill actually was.
Yeah.
And
let's take a look at Ross, bringing that spill up.
Yeah.
What was it called? Kalamazoo
Enbridge bitumen spill.
Yeah.
Because to ship oil from and it's interesting that they call it the oil sands. It really should be called the tar sands.
Yeah.
And you can't put...
That's what the Americans call it, I think.
Probably, yes, because they don't own it, right? So we're trying to make it sound like it's oil. Well, it's not. To get it flowing through pipelines, it has to be diluted with a hydrocarbon, and that's the problem. So you're shipping through a pipeline this tarry type substance that's been diluted, and the substance is actually hydrophobic. So it means that it doesn't mix with water. Mm-hmm. And in that spill that you can find, it's absolutely frightening because it took almost 2 years before they could even clean it up. And that was it contained in a river. And so if we get a spill like this, and that's my concern about the pipeline, that's the ocean that we're next to, and particularly in Vancouver Quadra, we're surrounded by water.
We are,
and not only is it the ocean, it's an arm of the Fraser River as well.
Yeah, sure.
And when there's a spill and it gets mixed, and it mixes with sediment that comes from rivers, it disperses into these little tiny globules that you can't clean up.
Right.
And so I was down.
So bottom line is, you would not approve, if you were an MP in Ottawa, you would not approve the expansion of this pipeline?
Oh, definitely not. We're very clear on that. Would
you want to shut down the current one?
Well, it's interesting because the transition plan that's proposed by the Green Party is to get us off hydrocarbons and move us into sustainable energy.
Sure.
And we have to do that to address climate change. I mean, that's very clear.
Yeah.
I believe the science, and you've got the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. There's these are internationally and world-renowned scientists that are saying there's a crisis and we have to do something. We have to lower the amount of CO2 that's being emitted.
Right.
And
so how quickly how quickly, and whether it's your view or the Green Party's view, or maybe it's the same, how quickly, I mean, if I'm listening to this podcast, fortunately for you, none of your voters are based in Alberta, but if I was listening to this and I'm an oil worker, an unemployed oil worker in Alberta, I'd be like, this asshole is trying to take away my job, potential for future employment. And I know Elizabeth May has talked about trying to transition everybody in Alberta and Saskatchewan and northeastern BC who's sort of dependent on the fossil fuel industry and getting them transitioned into something else, into clean tech and that kind of thing. What is how quickly would you, as the Green Party, if you had the balance of power, which a lot of people are talking about these days, we've seen it happen here in BC provincially, how would you as a party move us in that direction without, completely decimating the current economic environment that's already so beaten up in Alberta?
Right. And that's a really important point. And that's one of the reasons that the Green Party, I'm attracted to it, and their platform, in my view, is so good. Because Elizabeth and the Green Party is talking about a transition to a sustainable energy. But she's a realist as I am, and you can't do it. You can't just stop that immediately. Mm-hmm. But it's very clear that if we don't start the transition, this next election is so important, because if we don't start that transition away from hydrocarbons right now, we are not going to be able to meet the targets that have been set for the Paris Accord. Okay. And the Green Party has been very stringent on the importance of doing that. And we are saying we would like to see and will make sure that the levels are dropping by 60%. The other parties, the next closest to the NDP, they're only talking 38%, and the Liberals and Conservatives are talking 30%. Well, that is not good enough, and the scientists are saying it's not good enough. Right. So in regards to the workers, we have a just and fair transition. And one of the interesting little facts is that when you look at the two provinces that are actually best positioned for solar and wind power, it's actually Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Yeah, sure.
So
sunny there all the time.
Yeah, yeah. So
and lots of wind.
So people here and they're taking the wrong message if they're thinking that we're not considering them. We are just saying no. We have to start transitioning to getting away from hydrocarbons and start very strongly enforcing all forms of sustainable energy. So it's the solar, it's the wind, the geothermal. And
what a good example is the Pincher Creek wind farms. I don't know if you know Pincher Creek in Alberta, but an area that's been largely employed by agriculture and oil, and they've been well diversified. A lot of jobs that have transitioned over into wind power because there's so many. Pincher Creek, and go to images on Google there, you'll see just all these. Look at this lines and lines of out in the farmers' fields. Incredible. Right. Yeah.
And one has to be careful where one puts these and in fact solar panels. I know other areas, particularly I've seen it in Ontario, where they've actually got solar panels in just miles and miles of them, and it's generating solar power. And that is the way we should go. But the point there is the very skills that people have been using in the hydrocarbon industry in Alberta is exactly the same skills we need for producing and generating power from solar panels, from wind turbines, even geothermal. The wells that have been driven, some of those would be good for capturing geothermal power.
Really?
So you can't. The workers should be reassured that
there will be jobs.
Yeah, and it's a transition, and that's why it's called a just and fair transition.
Right.
And the other thing we have an advantage on here in BC is we're in a very fortunate position of being able to generate our electricity from
hydroelectric.
Yeah. And that's also true in Quebec as well.
Yeah.
So we actually have a concept of an energy grid, so that while we're transitioning away from hydrocarbons, we're also working on an energy transmission so that we can start capturing solar power from Alberta and Saskatchewan and feeding into that grid and making it a cross-Canada energy grid for sustainable energy.
Yeah, wow, that's good. Well, Geoff, great answer to that first question. let's jump to another hot topic in this election, and definitely within Vancouver Quadra, very important. We'll pull up the map. This is going to be on affordability of housing. So if we pull up the map of Vancouver Quadra, here's your sort of riding, and you've got probably one of the most economically diverse ridings of anybody in this country. I mean, you've got some of the highest income per capita postal code in West Point Grey and UBC and Shaughnessy. You also have students just getting by with a lot of student debt over at UBC. You have a very large First Nations in the Musqueam. And then you've got, I often use the phrase, these professional working millennials living in Kitsilano and everybody in between. So you got a very broad, and look, Joyce Murray is your incumbent that you're up against. I know there's been a lot of talk about people who are going to decide whether they want to vote NDP or Green. And, for you, hopefully you can pick up some of those NDP votes. But truly, at the end of the day, if you're going to be able to win, you got to take votes away from the Liberal Party and Joyce Murray. So what would you do as an MP? If you got elected as MP for Vancouver Quadra, what are you going to do, or what is your party going to do to address the affordability issue of housing in Vancouver Quadra?
Right, and I will answer that in a second. But when you mentioned about the NDP, one of the other points I wanted to make when we were talking about on the energy side is the reason that we are getting to the 60% and the NDP is only at 30% is we would ban fracking. And fracking is an absolutely terrible practice. You're putting mixtures down into fissures, trying to get methane out so you can create the liquid natural gas. Yeah. And the problem with methane is we're trying to control CO2, but it produces 4 times as much CO2 as does the burning of a fossil fuel. Does it really? So, but it's the fracking that's wrong. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, thank you for that.
In regards to housing, one of the big issues in housing, and I could talk for the next half an hour on housing and some of the you raised so many issues. One of the problems is that housing has been considered a commodity and is being treated like a commodity. And with your background in business, you know what and I'm assuming your listeners will know too when we say it's a commodity. So, and that's fueling speculation, for example, and some people are buying into housing instead of putting the money in other forms of investment because the returns have been so good historically. Yeah. And so one of the key parts of the Green Party platform is to say housing should be a right and it shouldn't be sort of in a commodity. So we're definitely...
I've heard this. Mm-hmm. I've heard the NDP say the same thing.
Right.
But what the heck does that mean? That everybody's guaranteed to get a house given to them? Like, what does that mean as a right? I mean, I can see, like, it's kind of like saying, well, everybody has the right to, free oxygen. I mean...
Yeah. Well, yeah, we hope that we're going to have oxygen in our atmosphere. So, but what it really means, and this is why I'm talking about it being a commodity, because when you look at the Liberals, or even I'm not as sure of what the Conservatives are saying on this, but it's somewhat similar. They're talking about a first-time homeowners grant.
Sure.
Okay, well, we're not talking about that. And at first response, you'd say, oh, well, that's terrible. But when you think about it, it's a first-time homeowners grant that is actually continuing to treat it housing as a commodity. Sure. Because and what it does is actually raise the price of homes. Yeah. And so and that's why I do differ with the approach that the Liberals are taking, because they're suggesting that they're going to support more ownership of homes. I'm not against ownership of home. I think it's great, and that should be a personal choice. But they're, by doing that, by supporting a first-time homeowners grant, what they've also been doing for the last 10 years is not supporting rental, and we haven't been getting good rental properties coming in. So when you look at it from a systems point of view, and this is me as an engineer talking now, you realize that, well, my goodness, they're encouraging people to buy homes, which is making a commodity, but you're not giving up people the option of renting or some of the other co-housing, co-op pieces that should be there. So, the Green Party would be very supportive of start to move those programs forward. Okay. Now, we're not...
and to get more granular, like what are the kind of things that, let's assume that the Green Party, Elizabeth gets reelected, and there's other fellow in Vancouver Island, I forget the fellow's name up there.
Right. Yeah. We need
so
12 MPs.
Okay. So you pick up 12 seats, right? What is it that you're going to do on a more granular level, on a more getting more specific? What would be the kind of things that you would want to implement from a policy perspective?
Right. Well, we're very clear in our policy, and I would encourage readers. It's an 82-page document, so it's very, very comprehensive.
Yeah.
And even then, that's just touching highlights.
Yeah.
But we're very clear there. I mean, we've got a target of increasing 25,000 new homes each year, and doing 15,000 rehabilitated units annually for the next 10 years.
Now, these are homes that the Green Party would build?
Well, no, we would be supporting it. So we would actually be funding through different groups.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
There's a National Housing Co-Investment Fund, so we would increase that by $750 million.
Yeah.
There's a Canada Housing Benefit Plan we would increase that by $750 million, and that's for rent assistance for 125,000 households. But we would also do other things. Housing is so important. We would have a Minister of Housing. Okay. Because housing is a provincial jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So it's going to vary by region, and there's all sort of other aspects. But it's so important that we would have a Minister of Housing.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important distinction. And we'd also create a Canada Co-op Housing Strategy. And one of the little interesting footnotes there, one of the places I've visited in talking to constituents has been the old age retirement homes.
Okay.
And what really struck me there is you've got people of similar age all living together, and that sort of contrasts to what I've seen when I visited co-housing. Because co-housing, the whole idea there is people may have been in a home and then they want to downsize, but you have shared spaces for the main rooms.
Yeah.
And they're like the kitchens and the common rooms, and then you still have your own private space if you want to have it.
Yeah.
But you're optimizing it, and what's really unique about that, and I think that's one of the things we've lost. You want to have a mix. Like, there's something great about being around young kids and young families. Sure. And in fact, the young children benefit from being exposed to the great wealth of wisdom and knowledge that the older people have.
Yeah.
And so
it's also well documented amongst the elderly that there's a lot of depression from loneliness.
Exactly. And when I've been visiting the homes, it struck me that, yes, they have social activities, but that's what's missing. That sort of normal stratification. You could get it by, if you've had a home, and is happening in the case with parents within my family, they're living with in a home as part of it. But once the kids, and that's what's happened now, they've moved. And so all of a sudden you're starting to miss, and you're there by yourself now.
Yeah.
Whereas in a co-housing option, there's other people that you can be compatible with. The sad part for me, in a general sense, is that it's very hard right now to even get a co-housing option up and running. One of the people on my campaign, my fundraiser, she and her husband, and she's got 2 kids. They've been, I think, they're about 3, almost 4 years out to clear all the administrative hurdles for co-housing.
Really?
And
so the Green Party would have a plan around this?
Well, we would want to encourage and see if there are things we can do. I mean, it's still a municipal zoning system.
Sure.
And I understand, obviously, that because it's a fairly new concept, that building codes, for example, that the city would have in place, when they get a co-housing option, they're not quite sure what they should do and how they should do it. But there are ways to assist. So, for example, they have to fund everything up front. So maybe there's a process where
co-op organization?
The people in the co-op themselves, yes. So, but maybe there's a way to assist financially with that, so that you could in fact
how do you get something like that off the ground if they have to fund everything up front?
Well, and that's what's hard about it. That's one of
the biggest hurdles.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a hurdle that I would like to see removed.
Yeah.
So, if we had a Minister of Housing, those to me are the sort of very issues that they should be taking and looking at, and because we're all about collaboration.
Yeah.
And so we need to be working with municipalities and with the provincial level, and housing is a provincial responsibility. And that's one of the things that's quite unique about the Green Party, because we go to all levels. So I got involved in politics through the Green Party of Vancouver, helping the Green Party.
Yeah.
I was going door to door. Adrian Carr, Michael Weeb, and Pete Fry. Helping them. And we've got 3 park board Greens, and we've got 3 Board of Education Greens, and Janet Fraser has been involved. So those are the people that I helped initially. But it's great because we're sort of an integrated party that goes up at all levels.
Yeah, definitely more so than the NDP or Liberals, that's for sure.
And so we when you talk about collaboration, we need to be doing that right across the country. And the Greens are very collaborative. I mean, those that watched the debate, it clearly illustrated the need for people with a collaborative approach. That the leaders' debate was hugely disappointing. It was
for you. It was.
Oh yes, it really was. Well, it was a lot of bickering. It wasn't a debate. It was sort of interrupting and not letting someone say what they wanted or what they wanted or what their perspective was. And I really think anybody who watched that would say, we deserve better and we should have better. And there were a couple of leaders that were there, certainly Elizabeth May, that really stood out in saying, okay, let's be rational and reasonable people here. I didn't see a lot of rational thought coming out in that debate. And I personally, I think we need people with a little more background on science to move these agenda items forward. The Green Party is evidence-based. So any of the decisions we're making, if you can show us the evidence that says we should be doing something, we're going to listen to that. And we're going to want to know. If we don't have enough information, then we would want that. But one of the other issues that comes in, and in fact, I just was asked this question yesterday, and we responded in this way. If I were to bring in a private member's bill, what would it be? Well, I would want to see a lot more transparency in government, number one. And we would have freedom of information applying to even right through to the Prime Minister's office. And that might have resolved some of the issues around SNC leveling.
That's interesting you bring this up, Geoff, because one of the things that Justin Trudeau really emphasized in his campaign leading up to the last election is he was going to really open up the transparency of federal government. He was going to make it easier for FOI whatnot. I don't know if you've ever run an FOI request to the federal government. I've done a lot. So I am not as much as reporters, but I'm pushy. I do look for a lot of information. And we finally got back a piece that we put a request in for almost 2 years ago. And I got it on a CD. My staff had to find a computer that had a CD reader because it came on a compact disc. I couldn't believe
my goodness.
it. And you compare that to the provincial government's FOI system. And the BC one, if Ross does an FOI request, once it gets published and sent to him, it gets published on their website, so everybody gets to see it. I'm the only one that sees my FOI unless I publish it on a third-party server. So none of the FOIs that you and I generate federally will ever actually be published on a federal website, which I think is terrible.
Well, and it brings up a number of issues. First of all, I think there is a difference, and the people listening should realize our best governmental legislation has actually come when there's been a minority government. That's when our most progressive, insightful, because it forces the government into a collaboration approach. So you're absolutely right. In 2015, the Liberals were able to scare us and also made promises to us. Well, if you look at their promises, I don't know which one to say. Exactly, I was going to go right there because one of
vote for me, and this will be the last time you vote under first past the post, and here we are.
And the irony in a way, and I think the Liberals will be getting what they deserve, because when you look at what's likely to happen with this election, it's likely to be the result that they would have got if there'd been proportional representation. So we're getting
which is minority government. Just to be clear, Justin Trudeau would have had a minority government had it been under proportional representation versus first past the post. Based on the last election. So this is great. This is a good lead into one other question I want to talk. Let's go back to your riding, Vancouver Quadra. Joyce Murray is the embedded incumbent. She's been in this role for a long time.
Since 2008.
Since 2008. So here we've got on the Wikipedia page, is always very helpful. You can see that she took over from Stephen Owen, who took over from Ted McWhinney, who took over from John Turner. It's been a liberal, sort of hot point, or it's like center point since 1984. There's never been anybody other than conservatives a couple times. In the last election, if you scroll down a little bit there, Ross, you'll see that Joyce Murray won with almost 53,000 votes that came in. So it was about a 71% turnout rate. She had 59% of the votes. Now, 31,102 votes. 2 of those were myself and my wife. I'd never voted for a Liberal before. I don't think my wife had either. It was partly a Stephen Harper, protest vote. They don't have my vote this time for sure. So now it's going back to, do I vote for Green again, like I've done for so many times? Do I vote for Conservative, because I can do that as well? But one of the other questions I wanted to ask you, as I've asked the other candidates, is when it comes to walking into that voting booth and you've got somebody there who maybe is on the fence, maybe they've voted Liberal most of the times in their past and they're really disappointed with Justin Trudeau and his party. Maybe they were like me and they voted for him one time and now they're going, I just don't know if I want to do. But they show up to that booth, they look at the list, and at the end of the day, they check Joyce's name. They check Joyce Murray. And my question to you on that is, what do you think's driving those people to still make that choice?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because we've done a lot of campaigning on street corners.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely amazing. Throughout the riding, people are coming up to us and saying, they tricked us last time.
Right.
This time they're trying to scare us again by saying, let's worry about the Conservatives. I don't think the Conservatives are going to get enough traction in Quadra, for sure.
Yeah.
They're totally upset with what the Liberals, how they tricked us last time.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. They're looking at the Green Party as a viable alternative. And in many ways, I think I cause a bit of a dilemma for them, because here I am as being a professional engineer and also having a PhD. So they know I know science.
Yeah.
And they know that I've got an engineering background, so I'm very careful with money. So, on your charts there, it'll show how much money the various parties had spent and will spend in previous elections. The Liberals and Conservatives are spending the max. Our campaign, we're being very, very careful. And I've got a fantastic official agent. And her position is, by the way, she's a nurse with an MBA. Her position is, you cannot spend any money that we don't already have in the bank. And so,
what a novel concept.
Yeah, I know. It carries over very well into it. So yeah, the people are very, very upset about a number of things. Obviously about the pipeline.
Yeah.
They see.
So what do you think? Going back to that question, what do you think it is that causes someone at the end to still check that Joyce Murray Liberal box? Yeah. When they're really been on the fence and they could have voted for Geoff Wright.
Yeah.
And what do you think? What kind of message do you want to send them?
It's not going to happen this time.
Okay.
People are so upset. We are hearing very strongly and very clearly, we made a mistake last time. We got duped. We are not going to make that mistake again. We're going to vote for where our values are, for where our principles are. We want honest, truthful leadership. When they hear me, it's funny, sometimes I'm in conversations with somebody and they'll stop mid-sentence and say, "You're not talking like a politician." And I hope, and I want to make sure, if I'm elected, it's not that I don't want to be a politician. I don't want to be that way. It's, I've had many years of a science training.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that I never speak as quote unquote a politician. I'm fact-based. I speak honestly. I say things as they are. And people, I think, will realize that. And they say, this is refreshing. This is what we need. We need someone who's going to be able to champion our issues in our writing.
Yeah.
As opposed to what Joyce Murray did. And this is one of the reasons people are upset. When she was representing the writing, she was saying, I'm an environmentalist. I'm against the pipeline. as soon as she got promoted to be president of Treasury Board, and I was listening very carefully to what she said during that speech she gave, she said, I am now in favor of the pipeline.
Yeah.
So how can an environmentalist say that they're in favor of a pipeline? And she's been endorsed by a particular group. And I don't know, I think they should be embarrassed to think that they've got an environmentalist, and it's not about her, it's about the party and the party values that she's with. And she's just, if she is an environmentalist, she's with the wrong party.
Right.
And people realize that.
Yeah. Well, you know what's amazing is that Hetty Fry was in here, and I asked her the same question about the pipeline, and she actually gave us the story about how she opposed the pipeline for many years, and then she endorsed it once she felt there was a proper strategy around it, which coincided with it going from being an initiative being pushed through by the Conservatives to the Liberals. And as soon as the Liberals took over, she felt it was a properly well thought out, safe plan. Very fascinating.
Yeah.
Because we're short on time, and I want to touch on two more items. And you actually touched on one just a minute ago, which is money. I want to talk about the fact that it seems to me like the Liberal Party, it's very evident. It's well documented. They are just spending money like crazy. Their upcoming platform their current platform is now projecting another almost $100 billion of deficits over the next 5 years. There seems to be no end in sight. I'd like you to comment on, if you were elected as MP, how would I know to make sure that you are going to make sure we don't put our children and our grandchildren into massive debt? So we want to talk about that for a second. And then I want to also finish off with talking about the party line and how much independence do you feel you've got? Because one of the things I really dislike about the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party, can't speak so much about the Greens or the NDP because I don't know it, but those two parties have very clear, this is our line, you stick to our party line. And I mean, if you look at Jody Wilson-Raybould, you look at Jane Philpott, part of the reason they're out is because you're not allowed to think independently, and it drives me nuts. Mm-hmm. So you've obviously heard my view on that. Let's start with the money situation.
Well, can we start with the second question first? Because that's a quicker answer. The Green Party is unique. We don't have a party whip. And Elizabeth May has been very clear on that. She's empowering us to speak for our constituents. And I've actually been told that even if I have a different point of view than what the party line is, and it's what my constituents want, I should be speaking out about it. So that to me is refreshing. That's the way it should be. And so we won't have that issue. But going back to other parties, it was very clear in examples such as the pipeline and SNC-Lavalin. They were basically being told to follow corporate interests. Yeah. They weren't allowed to talk about what the constituents wanted and why they wanted a different outcome than the corporate perspective. Yeah. And that has all sorts of implications both for SNC-Lavalin, that was very clear, but also for considerations about the pipeline going east. Yeah, sure. Like why was that shut down? Well, it's probably the one group that didn't want the pipeline going east was because Quebec is generating hydroelectric power. Yeah. So they didn't want to have competition. Need votes in
Quebec.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's very upsetting when you look at it from a perspective in that context. Yeah. That the wrong group is influencing.
So bottom line is you get elected, and if there's some topic, forget about the whatever it might be, some hot topic comes up and Elizabeth May is voting A, you have the right to vote B.
I have the right to vote B. Absolutely. Yeah. And I went to the talk that David Suzuki and Stephen Lewis gave out at UBC. Yeah. And it was absolutely fantastic. And one of the points they made that David Suzuki made was, first of all, elect a politician that understands science. So I think I meet that criteria. But the other thing he brought up was, as soon as you elect a politician, they're thinking about the next 4 years. And so they're going to do what they think should be done so they can be reelected. That's not true in my case. I have no career aspirations. I'm at the end of my career. Yeah. I can say things and do things and push for things within my constituency that I'm not worried about because I'm clear of that. Yeah. And so I think that's really important.
You've already proved yourself.
I just want to represent. I would be honored to represent.
Makes me think of my friend Andrew Weaver, who's done the same. He's
Yep.
Yeah, done a great job
Absolutely.
for the province. Money.
So let's go to money because
let's talk about money to finish this off.
Because one of the things that's really important is the fact that the Green Party platform was submitted to the Parliamentary Budget Office.
Okay.
And I think it's important for the people listening to realize the Parliamentary Budget Office doesn't pass or fail. They talk about degrees of uncertainty. But what happened is an independent consultant took the public release of figures and ran them through, and then there was all sorts of noise that, the Green Party platform didn't pass. I'm giving it a fail. Well, if I were that independent consultant, I would be embarrassed at this point in time because they didn't get the information they needed. They didn't have all the factual data.
Okay.
And once they were given the factual data for them to do an analysis, it came back out saying that the party platform got a pass.
Okay.
The only reason we didn't get a pass on all of the three categories they were using is that we hadn't built into our submission a contingency plan. And so we lost 0.5 of a point for that, and that took one of them. So it goes pass, fail, pass, whereas the overall rating is a pass. And it's very easy to put in a contingency plan. That would be something that can be done and will be done so that it's going to be pass, pass, pass. We're the only party that put a whole platform in. We put 24 planks in our platform forward. And it, in a way, is answering your question because one of the pieces in there was to balance the budget in 5 years. And their independent consultant has now said, yes, you've got a reasonable scenario for being able to do that.
Okay.
And so there's complete transparency. So when you're asking about what sort of guarantees can someone give, it's very clear. I would be, and I know Elizabeth May well enough to say, we've clearly set out a plan. And, you can hold our feet to the fire if we start deviating from it. I mean, we're going to have to adjust because nothing is perfect. But at least if we're going to have to adjust something, we're going to be very transparent about why something maybe need to be tweaked a bit or changed a bit.
Yeah.
But it's very clear that whenever we, it's like math. If you've got two sides of an equation. So when we propose one thing, we are always looking at, well, where's the money coming to do that? And is that feasible? And it's balanced all the time. So that really appeals to me and my evidence-based approach to things.
Great. Well, that's a great answer, Geoff. Thank you for that. One more thing I want to ask you about, and then we'll talk about your campaign, social media, website. Is it true that you guys effectively reuse your signs?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And in fact, it's quite interesting because when I first became, and you've got a picture of my nomination meeting where I was selected as the candidate. Georgia Strait, that was on June 22nd. On June 24th, they put out a wonderful article and talking about, and it was great press as far as I was concerned, but the theme was, who is Geoff Wright and who is this mystery candidate? And they weren't able to search for me. And, I didn't have a great media presence. And I've got a daughter who's at Lord Byng High School in the riding that we're both in. And, she showed me on the internet when she did a search for my name, there were over 300 Geoff Wrights, and in fact, there were many Dr. Geoff Wrights.
Oh,
and so I said, well, yeah, I could see why they couldn't find me because I didn't realize it was such a common name.
Right.
And we are working very diligently now to create a media presence, and I am on the media much more, and we're trying to ramp that up. And we're
going back to the signs.
Oh yes, right.
Is it true that you guys share these signs?
Yes. Yeah. Because they're plastic. We have a stand on single-use plastic.
Right.
And we want to eliminate single-use plastic. So our signs, and I've been going around to elementary schools, and the kids love this story because I bring a sign in with me and I ask them to describe it and what's it made out of, and it's made out of plastic. And I said, because the other thing that's not on there is my name. All it says is the Green Party.
Right.
Well, the reason we do that is these signs are reused. We can use them for municipal campaigns, for provincial, and for federal. And what we do at the end of this election, we're going to be collecting them, we're going to be storing them, and then we're going to be reusing them. Yeah. So it's a nice little anecdote.
I think I wanted to bring that up because
thank you.
If you think about in the order in which you're supposed to do this as well is reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yep.
And at some point I'm sure some of these signs you'll have to recycle them, but you're reducing the amount of use and and while you're reusing them, which I think is the more important point there.
Right.
And
in terms
it's kind of ironic because you have other parties like and not to knock the NDP too much here, but I mean, they try and claim that they're, more environmentally conscious, but from what I understand, they're just going to have to toss all those or maybe recycle them.
It's going to be having to toss. And they have very large signs. I was talking to the NDP candidate, and, the minimum order for their large signs is a minimum order of 50.
Oh, wow.
So, in our case, we only buy them when we've got the demand.
Right.
So we're at about 10 large signs right now.
Yeah.
Because we need the donations coming in, and as they come in, we then decide if we want to do it in, spend the money on brochures or web advertising or, other forms. And, so it's interesting. We're very, I think it's because I'm Scottish. I was born in Glasgow, Scotland. So I think that's the part of that shows.
Okay. That's good, Geoff. So here's your website. So it's geoffwright.ca. So GeoffWright.ca. Do you have a Twitter account or Facebook page?
We do have those accounts, yes.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm finding is that there's so many demands on you as a candidate, and I'm working flat out. I'm fortunate. I was employed, and I was able to my employer was very generous in giving me a leave of absence. And I wanted that for a couple of reasons, because I didn't want to be, making policy statements that might sort of contradict their particular point of view.
Right.
And so I asked for a leave of absence, and they agreed to it. And I think they saw the benefits of that. But from my perspective, I'm working, and I'm used to it. In many ways, running a campaign, it reminds me of two highlights in my career. One was being, as I mentioned, an engineer, and then rowing. So I'm used to doing the school and then going and working intensively. So I've got the endurance that's needed to be involved in a campaign. But also, when I was doing my PhD, there's always something to do, and there's always something more to do. And so I'm working long hours. But it's invigorating because I know why I'm doing it, and I can see the results and the benefits. And it sounds funny, but I sort of relax at the end of the evening by answering emails and responding to that.
Yeah.
But to be able to do that and keep up with the Twitter accounts and all of that, that's very difficult. And I've been going through a series of debates, and as they're starting to settle down now, because the time for debates is pretty well over. The next one is
has Joyce showed up to any debates?
She has shown up at some,
Okay.
But she's also not showing up. She apparently has said that she's reached her limit for debates. I don't know if she felt that was an Elections Canada rule. If it is, myself and some other candidates aren't aware of it. We're going to every debate we can.
Right.
And we enjoy it. And we're a great group.
Do you need volunteers, Geoff?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
And donations and whatnot?
Donations. We definitely
do you guys have an office set up? Or
well, no. People phone. They wanted interviews with me, and I say, my office right now is the great outdoors.
Yeah.
And so, for example,
if they need to reach you, how do people reach you if they want to get in touch?
Through the website. Yeah, we've got something on our website, to reach me, but it's listening. It's because we are listening, and we're trying to respond to the inquiries that come.
Yeah.
One of the difficulties with social media is, you'll get like 50 emails all the same, because a particular group with a particular interest will tell all their members, to email your candidates to say. So we try and fill in surveys, and like I did one for Parks and Recreation for BC recently.
Yeah.
I've done others. We've got a couple of others that are coming up. Daily Hive, for example, we're getting ready to respond to theirs. They asked a great group of questions. I would answer yes to most, obviously no to the one about the pipeline, because we're against that. But there were one or two questions there where they're just a little too open-ended. So I've asked my campaign team to provide me a benefit of their advice before I decide, because it's binary, right? It's a yes or a no.
Oh.
And I would like to have some flexibility in what I answered.
Yeah.
But yes, no, sometimes doesn't convey everything you would like.
Yeah.
But, you know,
and making donations, if someone wants to donate, how would they go about doing
again,
that?
online. Absolutely.
Go to your website,
yes.
geoffwright.ca.
Yeah. And they can do it locally. Actually, a lot of people don't realize you can donate a maximum of $1,600 to a party, but you can also donate a maximum of $1,600 locally. So it's actually a limit of $3,200. Yeah. And the donations, you know, there's an interesting little sweet spot that I'd like people to realize about. You can donate, if you commit to donating $400, depending which tax bracket you're in, it actually only costs you $100 because you're going to get, according to what Elections Canada has said, and or I don't know if it's Elections Canada, but on the website it calculates for it, depending on your tax bracket. You could be getting a $300 rebate. You don't get that money right away, but when you file your income tax, you do. And that seems like a pretty good deal. If it's only $100 out of your pocket and it's $400 comes to help my campaign, I don't see why everybody isn't doing that.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, with that, Geoff, I wish you best of luck. This is Geoff Wright. You are the Green candidate for Vancouver Quadra in the upcoming federal election. Hope you do really well. And best of luck, Geoff. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you very much. I wish we had more time. As you can tell, we're just getting warmed up.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Geoff.